All right, everybody, let's get started. It's right at 10. I know we have a small group, so I will make sure to allow some times for comments in the chat box in the corner. Feel free to interrupt me, ask questions, get clarification on anything as we go. But I will definitely make sure to use our time wisely so you're not sitting here listening to dead air just because we're scheduled to go till 11:30. So let's begin by just kind of going through some of the logistics that we normally do when we're bringing on people to be trainers for the Center for Addiction Recovery Training. So obviously, this training program is part of the larger CCAR training curriculum. It's trained, just like the other curriculums all across the country. And our focus today is to make sure you understand all of the logistics of scheduling the training and that you're comfortable delivering this particular training. So obviously, there may be things that come up once you're out there and actually delivering the training. But I want you to be rest assured that, we'll get to any questions today, but if there are things that do come up while you are training it or other questions that you may have after this webinar concludes, that you can always give us a call, shoot us an email, whatever you'd like, and we'll make sure that we get back to you so you always have a high comfort level when delivering any of our training programs. So with all of our curriculums, our main goal is to make sure that the way this is delivered is, hold on one second, Mike, I'll check off your thing. You can just use the chat box if you want, if you have a question. Or actually, that gives you your microphone. If you want to speak, you can speak, absolutely. So our goal throughout the TOT program is to make sure that you have all your questions answered, and then we want everybody to deliver it in the same way. So the underlying themes of certain modules and certain kind of aha moments that you had when you completed the training is what we want other people, regardless of where they're getting the training, to have. And so we really want to make sure that, as we go through this curriculum, you understand the thought process behind it so that when you deliver it, you're able to get the same message across. With this training, as with all of the other CART trainings, we have you fill out a trainer's agreement, and I will go through your expectations as well as our expectations, so that we're all on the same page. Some of this you've probably heard us before if you've attended our other TOT programs, so I apologize if any of this seems repetitive, but again, please feel free to stop me if you have a question. Again, all questions that that arise after this should be directed to us. If you need help with the training, scheduling it, order manuals, anything such as that, just give us a call. And I did put our number on this slide, which is 860-218-9553. So again, the first bullet of the trainer's agreement says that you're free to use this training curriculum. Again, this is a TOT for the Recovery Coaching in the Emergency Department training program. You are getting trained to deliver this curriculum only. Everybody has to go through the TOT portion of whatever training they want to deliver as an authorized trainer. So this particular agreement goes along with this particular curriculum. Let me kind of make this chat box a little bit bigger. Good morning, Phil. What I said to everybody is that we are just going to use the chat box to ask and answer any questions. So feel free to use the box down below to make any comments that you have. And we're just getting started. We're going over the trainer's agreement. Happy to have you with us. So again, one of the pieces that we always try to insist on is that when you are promoting or when you're training, that you consistently reference CCAR as the originator and creator, and that you don't change titles to, peer support specialist, things such as that. The title of the training is Recovery Coaching in the Emergency Department. People will know it as a supplemental component of the CCAR training program. And so we want to make sure that when they show up on that very first day and they have, a manual that's in front of them that says Recovery Coaching in the Emergency Department with the CCAR logo, that they're in the right spot. As well, when they get their certificate of completion, once they've attended the 2-day training, they're also going to have that name and our logo on that. And so we don't want to confuse them by changing any, terms in the title, because people may get confused as to what it is that they're actually training. We would like you to use the curriculum in its entirety and deliver it as a whole in the order specified. This again is set up as a 2-day training, 2 days of 6 hours each for 12 hours of CEUs or contact hours. It is very important that you spend a full 12 hours, because that's the certificate that we would award people, is for a specific amount of hours. And so now that this curriculum, as well as all of our other curriculums, are being used for certification, it's very important that the amount of time that participants spend on task learning is equal to the certificate that we award. We're not able to change or lessen the amount of the CEUs, like let's say you meet and you get through it in a day. We can't give, a CEU certificate for 6 hours. So use the timing that's in the book to make sure that you spend the full 12 hours. Also with this curriculum, if you decided that you wanted to do 4 half-day sessions, as long as you deliver it in the order that it is written, you can, split those days up if you need to, if it makes better, easier to schedule. Sometimes people can't get 2 full days off of work, but maybe they could do, meet in 4 half days. Just know that the manual is set up as 2 full days. So it would be up to you as the trainer to kind of work with that timing and create an agenda that works for you. The reason why we have a conversation as to charging people to attend the training is because we know that there are many different funding sources out there. Some people may be training through an organization that is picking up the tab for the training. Maybe they're paying for the manuals, they're paying for all the overhead, they're paying you as trainers, and so there may not be a fee involved. The only thing that we suggest is that, you think about the value of this training. It's a highly respected curriculum. It awards CEUs. People should understand, even if they are coming for free, the value that they're getting, so I know that all of the trainings, there's a number attached to the trainer's or to the participant manual. In this case, these manuals are $30. That's the only fee back to CCAR. So everything else, that you end up having to pay for, so hotel space or meeting space, easel pads, renting or purchasing a projector, those are all things that you could roll into the cost of the registration. And you should also think about the time that you're putting into it as well. If you come up with your own trainer's fee of what you think would be a fair price to charge for your time for delivering a training. I mean, when you think about all those fees, they do add up. And especially if you're going to offer coffee and lunch, that can go up even more. So just make sure when you are pricing this if you don't, or if you're not, getting funded by an agency or a grant or things such as that, that you think about all of those details when you're putting a registration fee together. We ask that you inform us as to the date, location, and number of people trained on the CD that you have with your trainer's materials. We have a trainer request form, which is also on our CART website, and I'll give you that website in just a few minutes when we're done with this piece. We need that information to be filled out and either scanned and emailed back, faxed back, however you get it back to us, because we register every single training into our database. This really helps us to know who's training what and when, so that if people call in and want to attend this training, maybe they're coming from Maryland and I could say, oh, Angel's a trainer down there. Let me see what she has scheduled. It's those types of connections that we're able to make when we have the information in our database. Also, we do, from time to time, hit milestones with the amount of people that we've trained, and having those numbers from you really helps us to kind of keep track and also project, if we have a need to print a certain amount of manuals or budget for a certain amount of manuals, things such as that. So it's really important for us to have all that information in one centralized place. All CCAR manuals must be purchased from CCAR. You cannot duplicate the manual. They are all copyrighted, including this new curriculum. And duplicating the manual could result in your losing your status as an authorized trainer. The other piece that I will say is that the cost of the manual, which I had said earlier, is $30 for this training manual. It does include shipping. However, please note that if you're not able to get us your notice of training so that we can have the 7 to 10 business days to get this order to you, we may have to charge additional shipping, and that's just from the printer. If they have to charge us more because something has to be shipped overnight, or if something has to be shipped, some people have asked for same day. Unfortunately, we're not Amazon Prime. We don't always have 2-day shipping with drones in the air. And so, we always try to work with you in our printer to make sure we're shipping it at the most reasonable rate. If we do have to ship something late, we include you in on that conversation. But the best way to avoid that is to just get that information to us in as much advance notice as possible. We do provide you with PowerPoint slides. Those are on the CD. If you need them emailed to you, let me know. I know not everybody has a CD drive, but some people do at least like to have a copy on a CD so that they always have them. We understand that you may need to customize the presentation. There are some slides you may want to hide. If you have specific policies that you need to go over in specific areas as opposed to what we're providing as general information, feel free, if you're training for an organization, to do that. You can do that. Just don't make alterations to the content. And that's really what we just, want to make sure, and that you don't take our logos off and put another agency's logos on. Our logos are there. It's our training material. We are the authors and the copyright owners. And so it's really important to make sure that you don't alter things in that way. We ask that you provide a list of your participants that go through the training as well, so we can add them to our database. On the CD that we've sent, as well as in the email that Lizanne sends back once a training is registered, you will get an Excel spreadsheet that you can fill in all of your participant names and send it back. Some people print that off and use it as their sign-in sheet and fax it back to us, take a picture of it, get it back to us. Whatever you want to do to get that information back to us, we would just really appreciate it. Many times people forget to do the evaluation at the end of the training, and so 6 months from now when they're looking for their certificate and they don't remember if they completed the evaluation, we go back to that sign-in sheet to try to verify that they actually attended so that we can open that eval up and get them a certificate. If we don't have that sign-in sheet, it's really hard for us to do that process. And so we may have to, bug you for a training that was, 12 months ago and hope that you still have those records if you haven't gotten them to us. Every time that you deliver one of our training programs, you're required to have all of the participants complete an online evaluation. We can also provide you with a customized training report out of SurveyMonkey if you're interested in hearing, what people said about your training, did it hit all the marks? Some trainers like to get that feedback for strengths and weaknesses. That's completely up to you if you want that or not. Because we use SurveyMonkey, we provide you with a unique link every single time, and that is again something that Lizanne emails out to everybody as soon as they register a training. And you are given a link for every single training that you register with us. So if you've trained this training in August and then you train it again in October, you would need to have 2 training request forms, one for the August date, one for the October date, and we send you a unique link and class number for each of those 2 trainings. Even though it's the same curriculum, every time you deliver it, it's an occurrence, and that gets its own unique evaluation link. Any questions about any of the pieces that I just went over regarding our expectations from trainers for any of those logistical pieces? I see Phil is typing. All right, great. Everybody else good? All right, if I don't see any comments, I'm going to move on. CCAR agrees to send all trainers any updates to the curriculum, so you'll always have the ability to work with the latest version. We will inform you of any ongoing education or training opportunities as it relates to your ability to professionally deliver this curriculum. We don't sell our curriculums. In order to deliver one of these trainings, you must attend the actual training and the accompanying TOT program. Each training comes with 1 hour of technical assistance prior to an event and an hour of technical assistance post-event. I don't ever charge for people to call me to ask me questions about a training. I don't think anybody's ever called me and needed to even use a whole hour before an event or after an event. The only time, and the reason why we keep the additional on-site technical assistance may be purchased, is if you wanted us to actually go and train with you, or if you wanted us to go and help support you in any way. That would be something that we would obviously charge for. But anything else, I would rather you call me, shoot me an email, let me know that you have a question about the curriculum, and I will take as much time as it needs to make sure that you're feeling confident to deliver whatever module that it is that you're having an issue with, so that you're comfortable when you get up in front of the classroom. As ambassadors, of CCAR and this training program, it's really important for us that you are the most comfortable that you can be, and as I said, in that you're maintaining the integrity of the curriculum. So if there are questions that come up and you don't know the answers, it's okay to say, I don't know, let me check back and get back to you, and then use that time during lunch or a break to send us a quick email, give us a call, and we will be sure that we do our best to respond as quickly as possible. This is the website for the CART site, addictionrecoverytraining.org, and /TOTS is the page for trainers. So that has all the information that you will need to order training manuals. If you want to register your training with that training request form, all of that information is right there. As trainers, Lizanne is your main contact when you're setting up a training, when you're ordering manuals, and she is thoroughly in this process every single day. She's, working with the database, working with trainers. She has daily phone calls with our printers. So if there's ever any issue, regardless of what it is, in regards to registering a training, manuals, anything such as that, you can reach out to her. Her number again is 860-218-9553, or you can reach her directly via email at Lizeanne, Lizeanne, @ccard.us. One of the other pieces, and I mentioned it earlier regarding the contact hours, is that CART issues a certificate of attendance good for 12 CEUs for those who complete and attend this training curriculums. Our certificates are able to be used for certification, but we do not certify anybody. We're not a certification board. If you're looking to figure out what the certification is like in your state for recovery coaches or peer support specialists or whatever might be at this level, I do have a website at the bottom of this slide. I'll give you just a minute to kind of write that down if you're interested in looking at it. It's a directory presented by the ATTC network, and you can go through and search by state to see what certifications are available in your state. I always think it's a good idea to know what your particular state might be looking for certification. If it's, if they want a specific amount of training or a specific type of content, if there's an exam, chances are people are going to ask, and they're going to ask you as trainers if you have that information. So if you know you have certification in your state, it's definitely a good idea to take a look and see what those requirements are. Or again, if you're unsure, you can go to the ATTC network and do a search and see what's there. And feel free to pass this along to people if they're calling from other states to attend your training and you're not sure. They can also look it up for themselves. The only thing that we provide is a designation, which is our Recovery Coach Professional designation. As our training curriculum has become the gold standard and our training is accepted by certification boards across the country, we found that people were starting to call themselves CCAR trained recovery coaches. So we looked to create a way for those people who were looking to establish themselves as a recovery coach professional in the field to go through a process with us. The requirements are that you've completed a number of training hours, which for us it's 60 training hours. 30 hours must be the RCA, 16 must be in our ethics training program, but the additional 14 that you would need could come however you'd like, as long as it's related to recovery coaching. We ask that you submit a resume or an essay outlining your experience with recovery coaching, and then we conduct an interview, because we believe that that's the best way to know for sure that somebody has mastered the art and science of recovery coaching and really pays attention to those three legs of the stool. Our biggest thing always is, are people actively listening? Are they asking good questions? Are they discovering and managing their own stuff? And as always, are they treating their recovery as resources? And that's particularly what we expect of our trainers as well. Again, we're facilitating a process. We expect the work to be produced. We expect the answers to be coming from the participants themselves. And so that's something that as trainers, we should be modeling as we're delivering the CCAR curriculum programs. Each of our trainings were developed with the principles behind adult learning theory. And so we know that adults are internally motivated and self-directed. Adults bring life experiences and knowledge to learning experiences. Adults are goal-oriented. Adults are relevancy-oriented. Adults are practical, and adult learners like to be respected. When you think about what we say about adult learners and the way that we want trainers to model a recovery coach using those foundational principles of recovery coaching, you'll see it's pretty much in line with what this slide states already. And so our goal is to really treat everybody as they're the most valuable resource in the room, because they are, and to each other they will be that way. Their perspectives are definitely needed and wanted and encouraged through all of our training programs. So the next piece I'm going to do is start going through the curriculum. So before I move on with that, I just want to make sure that everybody is all set and no one has any other questions about any of those logistical pieces. The other piece that I'll share is you should have all received training manuals. If you haven't, that's okay, not a problem. We can get them to you after the fact, but you should have received a trainer's manual, a participant manual, and a CD with slides on it. Primarily, I'm going to go through the PowerPoints. Just to kind of give you an overview of the agenda and go through each module. So if you don't have those manuals in front of you, it's not super important, but I may use them as I'm working through this just to make sure that I hit any key points. As always with our curriculum, we have an overview agenda for you as trainers that gives you the module, a general sense of the amount of time that module should take, the page numbers, if there's a page number associated with it, as well as a slide, if there's a slide number associated with it. Now, one of the pieces that I will say is with the timing, that could vary based on the amount of people in the room, the amount of discussion that's had, and that's really where you as trainers kind of come with your own gifts and talents for training to understand how to facilitate different sizes of groups of people. There may be times where you have to stretch in order to get it to fill the time that's allotted because maybe people are a little bit quieter, maybe your class isn't as large, and there might be times where you really have to keep control of, the comments and things in order to stay on task. And so hopefully this timing grid is a good guide for about how long it'll take, but you know more than I do, best laid plans. Sometimes you'll find one particular module takes a lot longer just because there's a lot more comments, and so you might have to steal some time from others. So just keep an eye on the time, and that's why we provide an agenda like this, so that you kind of have an idea of where you should be by when. With all of our training programs, we begin with an introduction of ourselves, and we use this model to introduce ourselves to everybody, followed by the participants using this format. Now, again, this is one of those pieces, the more people you have in the room, this could take a lot longer than what we've allotted. We usually give about 20 minutes for this. So it really just depends on how many people you have in the room, how talkative people are, but we encourage people to kind of stick to this 2-minute autobiography format. Otherwise, introductions could, get pretty lengthy and go on and on. And this is a good way to kind of, deliver our personal story as well, kind of highlighting these couple of things. The next piece of the curriculum that we review, again, adults are self-directed, they're motivated, and they like to know what they're doing and how it can be relevant. And so we want to go through the learning objectives just so that participants understand what it is that they're going to be working on over the next 2 days. And these are the objectives for this course. We want participants to be able to describe the roles and functions of a recovery coach working in the emergency department. We want them to understand and practice staying in their lane. We want them to be able to develop skills to advocate and educate staff, patients, etc. as a way to demonstrate accountability within the role of recovery coach. We want them to use motivational interviewing to bring people through the stages of change into recovery. And we want them to be able to further develop their art of recovery coaching. And that leads us to an overview of the agenda, which we've gone through and done a welcome and introductions at this point. We're doing an overview of the program. We will be getting to working agreements in just a moment. Our first module of the content is accountability. Then we look a little deeper at the recovery coach roles. we look at an emergency department recovery coach job description and developing that in part one. And then it's already lunchtime. We give some time for journaling. There's a part two to the job description piece. Our last two modules of the day are staying in your lane and language of recovery. Just like all of our trainings, we provide an opportunity for folks in the room to create a safe space. And part of the ways that we do that is to provide a set of working agreements that are developed by the participants. And so we really want them to create the environment and to kind of create the rules that they need to have for an environment that allows them to feel comfortable to share openly, without judgment. And so these are the pieces that we really want to push people on that very first morning. And so we really have a set of rules that we can kind of live by over the next 2 days. These are our expectations, as a follow up to that work product in the working agreements. And it's really one of those pieces where we really want people to feel free to share their true beliefs and values when it comes to recovery coaching, because that's really where the magic happens, is learning from each other in the room. Before we move on to the accountability piece, is there any questions or comments or anything that you might be uncomfortable with delivering so far? And I'll just wait a moment to see if anything pops up. Great. Thank you. So one of the pieces that we've done in this curriculum is really taken some of the voices from people that are working as recovery coaches in our emergency department program here in Connecticut, and had them answer some questions about their experience, so that their voices, even though they may not be in the room, their voice would be in the room. And so you'll see these kind of scattered throughout the curriculum. Obviously, this would be one of those pieces where if you have your own recovery coaching program and you have your own people that you want to maybe ask some questions about accountability and share their experiences and things in place of our slides, this is a piece where you would be able to kind of customize this. So this is a quote about accountability just from one of our recovery coaches, and it leads us into the first small group activity. So what we want people to tell us is, as an emergency department recovery coach, who are you accountable? How do you demonstrate that accountability? And then could you and would you, how would you rank the list of people that you've come up with? So this is our first small group activity. From there, we build a larger list. So we kind of, give groups a chance to go through in their small groups and come up with their individual lists. And then we kind of have them round robin, read them off so we can create a bigger list. And then, we kind of go through and ask, how would you rank it? And one of the pieces too that we want people to think about is how important accountability is, especially in this role. A lot of people are watching us. A lot of people are looking at us, especially if this is a brand new program, or especially if we've gotten funding for maybe one hospital and they're looking to see how successful it is in order to put it in other hospitals or other programs. There's a lot of people looking at us. And so a lot of times, who we may feel that we're accountable to is the recovery, which isn't a wrong answer, but who else are we accountable to? Are we accountable to our employer? Are we accountable to the hospital that hired us to be there? Are we accountable to the recovery's family? Are we accountable to the recovery community? Are we accountable to the whole community at large? These are the conversations that we want to have happen. Once we have that big conversation we do have an opportunity to see a definition of accountability just to give people an understanding of what that looks like, and then we ask a closing question to tie this whole module up as to why is this important for recovery coaches working in the emergency department. And then this is just another closing slide again about the impact that we have. Again, that we're not just, working with recoveries, we're working with hospital teams, we're working with a bunch of different staff, again, our employer. A lot of people are looking at us, and so we want people to understand that, we create a huge impact now that we're going into these new programs within emergency departments and medical centers. Any questions or any difficulty that you can see in delivering that piece? All right, then I will go on. The next piece that we review are the recovery coach roles, and we basically just want to provide a very quick overview and review of what we already know from the RCA. And so we kind of bring these forward and just look at some of these. We give folks sometimes to maybe describe some of the different roles by calling them out. Who can tell me what a motivator and cheerleader is? Who can tell me what an ally and confidant is? And just ask people to define those so we're all on the same page, because from here we want to go into our next small group activity, which is basically, when we go through that list, we want people to kind of think about, what would be the top five, the top five roles that I draw from when I'm acting as a recovery coach in an emergency department. What are the five most important things that I need to think about when I'm there? And so we look at having small groups generate a list of tasks and skills for those top five. And so one of those pieces that we always make sure that we do when we're doing a small group activity like this, where we're actually creating some work product, is identify a recorder and a reporter, because we will want somebody to transcribe this, to put on the easel pads, and a reporter to report this piece out. And this is one of those pieces where we do want to take those easel pads and kind of put them up on a wall so people can take a look at them. I think seeing the overwhelming list of tasks and skills needed to be an emergency department recovery coach is very important for people to see all the different ways that we help support people through being a recovery coach in an emergency department. Any questions about that piece? Once we're done with this piece, we go automatically into our morning break. And I see Angel is typing, so I will make sure. Perfect. Thank you. So we go a little bit deeper into recovery coach roles when we come back from break. And so we really want to give people some time to kind of think about, the last section and tie it into this section. And so once, we've kind of given them a chance to create that work product and report on it, this is one of those slides that could kind of just tie that conversation together. From here, what we want people to do before we move into the next activity is we want to give people some time to kind of do a quick huddle and mingle about that last activity, thinking about what their biggest aha moment was, in order to kind of shuffle up the groups before we move on to the next one. And so from here, like I said, we have this one kind of slide to tie that whole conversation together, and then we might have everybody break up into smaller groups of 3 to 4. And that's really because the next section that we go into is another small group activity, which is the looking at what a job description would look like for an emergency department recovery coach. And so we tell small groups of 3 to 4, you've been tasked with recruiting and hiring recovery coaches for a new emergency department program. What would that job description look like? And in their manual, they actually have a spot for position summary, qualifications, and responsibilities. The reason why we have folks get into smaller groups of 3 to 4 is because this might be one of those pieces where we really want everybody to have an opportunity to share, to write these job descriptions. And with larger groups, sometimes it gets a little overwhelming to kind of organize thoughts and kind of put all those things on paper. And so this is one of those pieces where, again, smaller groups, can produce a lot of work quickly. And so we give them, again, that assignment of writing a position summary, qualifications, and responsibilities. Once they've had time to go through all of that, you should be at lunch, which then when you come back, you provide them with an opportunity to journal. And then we do our report out from the last activity. So if people need more time to think about and finalize their thoughts, you can definitely do that. But here's where you really want to spend some time looking at what folks have said about their job descriptions. What does that position summary look like? What are those qualifications? What are those responsibilities that those emergency department recovery coaches are going to have? And this is a really important task because we know that people are getting called in and hiring recovery coaches, but not everybody understands the spirit of what a recovery coach is. So we think it's really important for us to kind of have those conversations. Some people we know are going in and doing mini assessments like junior caseworkers. And that's not really the true spirit of recovery coaching. That kind of ruins the integrity of the role. And so we want to make sure that people really understand, if they put things down like assessments and things or documentation, that we kind of talk about those things when they're reported out. What do people feel about that? And really kind of take this as deep as we can so people really understand what that job looks like. And so if they are going back to replicate it, if they are going back with this information to build a program, that they're going back and they have all the understanding of what it really takes to be a recovery coach in an emergency department. From there, we share the CCAR EDRC job description, which we have in the back of the book. It's one of the resources. We also, on the slide share our position summary. This would be one of those cases where if you do have your own organization's position summary or job description, that you could insert that slide and share it here. Any question about that piece? The next piece that we go through on day 1 in the afternoon is staying in your lane. And so this is one of those pieces where we really want people to understand that even though the setting may put them in a medical environment, they're still not, we still don't want them to cross over certain boundaries in their role. And so we want to not only remind people what a recovery coach is not, we also go through a document that was shared by Bill White from the RCA that really differentiates a counselor's role, recovery coach's role, and a sponsor's role, just to give people that additional understanding of what it means to stay in your lane. We really want people to think about the fact that in an emergency department, and we'll share with this slide, it could be easy for recovery coaches working in an emergency department to be seen as different members of the medical staff. And so people might ask them questions that are not within their, within their lane to be able to answer. And so we want them in their small groups to think about what are those areas that recovery coaches could easily veer out of their lane, and what would we do if those instances occurred. And so that's where we want to really kind of have them brainstorm all of those instances. Could be asking about medication, could be, people are, just automatically recommending detox as opposed to multiple pathways. I mean, there's a wide variety of ways that a recovery coach could get caught up in having some boundary issues. So we would just want to put those out on the table so we can have a large group discussion about what we might do to help support somebody in this role, so that maybe doesn't happen. So the last questions that we ask to tie up that activity are, what can we do as emergency department recovery coaches to assure that we stay in our lane? And what are some of those additional supports that can help us do so? And that's how we wrap up this section. If there are no questions, I will move on to the last final section of day 1. Okay, I don't see anybody typing. So the last module is really language of recovery. And this is something that we know that as recovery coaches, we may be going into hospitals and emergency departments that are looking for us to take this on because they have compassion fatigue when it comes to dealing with people who come in either as overdose or looking to seek help and things such as that. And, sometimes there's this sense of frustration, and you can tell that in the language that they use to refer to this population or how this population gets treated. And so we want people to understand that this is where our advocacy hat comes on, and our education hat to really help educate and advocate for recovery and to get people to understand the positive of recovery, and that we're there to help lighten their load, and to look at it as a possible or a positive endeavor, as opposed to thinking of us as being in their way or whatever that is. There might be a lot of that we need to do to help build those relationships, and part of that really could be in just using positive language about recovery. And so we want groups in this section to think about the list of terms that we should not be using in order to change attitudes and terms that we should be using, and this is again where we want to advocate and maybe, take somebody aside if they're using disparaging language and just remind them, that recovery is possible. And what about looking at this person in this way, and what can we do to help do that for people? And so from there, we share this information about recovery, the language that people use, and how stigma, especially in a medical setting, could lead to neglect or denied care or just verbal stigma that could occur, from people who are in these medical settings looking to get help, and what we may have to do in order to kind of build that bridge. And then this is basically the last slide for the end of that discussion by, again, one of our emergency department recovery coaches. The very last piece is to have folks demonstrate a situation where a recovery coach is coming into an emergency department where the attitudes about the recovery are extremely negative. And so this is our ED recovery coach theater. People love doing skits, and so we want them to kind of think about all the things that we've learned so far on day 1 to demonstrate it and to review it. So what are the roles this recovery coach might have to use? What are the things that we just talked about with language? How is this recovery coach going to stay in their lane? So these are all the pieces that we want people to think about when they develop their skit as the final module of the day. And then from there, we do a final slide, ask for any remaining questions or comments, and review any pluses or wishes. Any questions about any of the pieces that we covered from day 1, Or is there anything that you find difficult? Or maybe tell me what module might be the most difficult for you to facilitate. I see John is typing, so I'll just give that a moment. At this point, I would say if you have about, 4, 5, 6 people, I think that's okay because they can all have roles, just maybe non-speaking. We've seen people play, obviously you have somebody who's the recovery, you have somebody who's the recovery coach, you might have a family member, you might have a nurse or a doctor. People have had, EMTs, as the people, wheeling the person in or what have you. So it really just depends. I mean, if you have a smaller group, um, and you have enough time, maybe you have just 3 or 4 people. If you have a larger group and you need to use 5 or 6 people, people make do. You know, a supervisor could step in. So there's definitely enough ways to have multiple people have roles. But I've seen, usually we have about, I would say the average is about 5. Does that help? Perfect. All right, so let's move on to day 2. As with all of our training programs, we begin the morning, obviously welcoming everybody, but inviting everybody to kind of get up and do a huddle and mingle. And in the same way that we've done with any of our other training programs, we look at topics from the day before and have folks chat about them. And so we usually have people pair up for about 3, 4 minutes, then have them, huddle up with another group of pairs. So could be another 3 or 4 minutes. You could do this 2 or 3 times, depending on what time you started. But we really want to give some time to kind of carry the learning from the previous day into today's training. And so you can use topics like, accountability, the recovery coach role, staying in your lane. What about language? Has anybody had a first time working in an emergency department? What does that look like? So any of those pieces really that you want to bring in from the day before would be great. And also at this point, if there's things that came up the day before, that weren't part of the agenda, but maybe there was a parking lot item or something that somebody brought up that, you said you were going to answer, maybe that's when you have that conversation as well. Once they're all up and out of their seats and the huddle and mingle portion is over, we usually have them line up. You can line them up by whatever you'd like. I think we give the prompt of having them line up by years of experience with recovery coaching to create new table groups. You could have them line up by who drove the longest distance to get there, number of siblings, birthday, whatever you feel like doing. But it is a good way. Again, we try to break up the groups a lot with this training because we know that there are some people that are working currently as recovery coaches and also are working as recovery coaches in emergency department settings. There are people who are looking to build programs. And so we really want to kind of shake up the group so everybody has that opportunity to work with different perspectives throughout the 2 days. Just like every other training and every other morning, we review the learning objectives. We go through the agenda, which today we're focusing on a lot of the skills that somebody can use, so motivational interviewing and stages of change. From there, we have our regular lunch and journaling, and then we look at how we help, really diving in at some of those recovery coach roles again and developing our art before we continue to think about next steps in professional development. Again, we review the working agreements in the morning just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, everybody felt safe, and we provide an opportunity to negotiate if there are things that people want to add, from the day before. Could be, let's say the first day there was a lot of side commenting or things such as that, and it was hard for people to hear who was speaking. Maybe this is where the suggestion is, to keep crosstalk to a minimum or to reduce side conversations, whatever those pieces are to make sure that the room is safe and comfortable for everybody to be able to learn. So we want to make sure that we do that piece one more time every single morning of our training. In this piece, we give folks another chance to look at motivational interviewing again. And so we really look at the 5 principles of motivational interviewing, and we give a brief summary of each of the principles. And so if you remember, we did this in the RCA as well. And if you'd like, you can have different people read different portions of each or different slides so that you're not having to talk the whole time. But we really want people to understand what this concept of motivational interviewing is. And so we go through and look at develop discrepancy, avoiding argument, support self-efficacy, and then this role with resistance, which I know some people are now calling it dance with discord. So we just want people to kind of have an understanding of each of those principles, because at the end of this, they're going to go into another small group activity. And so the way that we set this up is we have a station for each of the 5 motivational interviewing principles. And so you can have those on easel pads around the room, or maybe you just have some Post-its up on the wall, but you would make groups and you can figure out, is it full groups of table? Do you have people count off 1 through 5 and then put all the ones under one station, kind of thing, to really have the folks in the room actually develop those sample statements. So when you think about what we did in the RCA is we shared sample statements. I see that you want to do this, but you keep doing this, kind of thing, just as an example. And so we want the participants to come up with what those sample statements and sample questions would be under each of those 5 principles. And so you have about an hour to do this piece. So depending on how many people, people can be, at each station for, 10 minutes. As you start going through, you may find that in the beginning you give people more time, and as they get to some of the other stations, they might need a little less time because there's not as many sample statements to add, but definitely give each group enough time to go through each of the stations. And one of the pieces too is if you find you're in a small space, you could even, take the Post-it sheets and have people just rotate those as opposed to rotating people. Whatever you need to do to get that kind of activity across. But the biggest piece is, you want people to go through when it's done and then kind of do a gallery walk, so they can see all of the work product, that was created. This might be a way for them to be able to add some tools to their toolbox. What are the statements that I now looking at that think, wow, I would have never thought to ask that, but that's such a great question. That's what we want people to do. And so we go from there and we give an opportunity for folks to kind of go back through the original RCA sample statements and just briefly go through these, as slides just to reinforce some of this. Let me just quickly go through this. And we also, if there is time, you can also do a role play. So if you have less people in the room and it doesn't quite take a full hour, you can decide to do a role play to give people an opportunity to practice some of those sample statements and questions that they've just come up with. Any questions about any of that piece? I see somebody's typing, so I'll just give that a moment. Oh, thank you for saying that. I think so too. I think when you walk around and you see all the different ways that people are connecting with other people, and the different statements or questions that they have to get somebody to think about something a little bit differently, I think it's huge. I mean, we've seen people take pictures of the Post-its, while they're all up over the gallery walk, just because it's great to have those tools in their toolbox. Especially if you have people who are working in medical settings right now because they've had that experience and can share it with everybody else. So thank you for that comment. I really do appreciate it. From there, we move on to stages of change, which is really, the framework where we're using the motivational interviewing to move someone from one stage to the next. And so a lot of times when we're working with people in an emergency department, we may have to get them in the very beginning of this process and move them very quickly to action. And so we really want them to kind of, if you think about the table that we had reviewed in the RCA, where we go through and look at, what would be a recoveries task in pre-contemplation to move to contemplation, and we also look at what the recovery coach's role would be in doing that. Well, this is where we want the participants to come up with those tasks. How would a recovery coach working in an emergency department move somebody from pre-contemplation to contemplation? How would they move them from contemplation to preparation? This is one of those pieces where we do it in small groups, really to kind of work and come up with how do we do those pieces. And so once time has lapsed with this section, we really do have them, we have them stand up and report out all of the findings and things that they had. Again, this is another piece that could be helpful in somebody's toolbox to think about, oh, I would have never thought about doing it this way or doing it that way or asking this question and whatnot. And so from there, we go through and just share from the RCA what we had in that original table that was developed, and how do you move somebody from one stage to the next, and what's our role in that process, just to reinforce the learning. And then at the end of this piece, once we've reviewed all of these pieces and asked for any final comments, we are at lunch. Any questions about the stages of change piece? All right, I will move on. Again, we provide some time for journaling after lunch, and we do invite another huddle and mingle again, just to get people into new table groups for the afternoon. From here, we really start focusing on working in the emergency department and really kind of give people that understanding of, what is our goal as recovery coaches. So thinking about, what is the main objective of the emergency department and what is our goal as recovery coaches, and what have we learned so far in this training that will help us meet that goal, and how do we connect people to recovery, and how do we move from resistance to opportunity. So when we're working with people who are a little bit resistant to, even this process of having us in the emergency departments, how do we move people who, like a social worker who is resistant to sign off on some of the suggestions that we're suggesting as next steps because they were developed by the recovery and not part of their typical exit strategy, so to speak. What is our role in all of this? And so we just kind of look at some of these big picture questions to get us to really focus on how we do what we do in this particular role. And from here, we look at these 3 recovery coach roles: advocate, motivator and cheerleader, and resource broker, and really kind of breaking these apart and looking at some very pointed questions about each of these roles that each of the small groups will look at. And so this is one of those pieces too, if you find that some of your sections from earlier have, gone a little bit longer and you need to kind of borrow some time, maybe you give groups, one role to answer the questions, and then they do a report out. This is where, as trainers, we trust you to get the content delivered, but if you need to think about different ways of getting the work done in order to save time, you can do that too. Really depends on how long some of those earlier modules take, but that's another way to deliver this and still get the same point across. And so we share a slide for advocate, and then we give folks an opportunity to look at their manuals and answer some questions. So how do you see yourself working in the role as an advocate in the emergency department? Who are you advocating to? And what might you need to do to get buy-in from hospital staff and the local community? So some of those, if you remember advocate, we look at big A, little a, so this is where we really want to think about, what is it that we need to do for that recovery, and what is it that we need to do from this whole system in order to make things work better, in order to be able to meet the needs of that recovery. What do I have to do? How do I have to build a bridge with some of the hospital staff? And so that's one of the pieces we kind of look at a little more closely in this section. The next section that we look at is a motivator and cheerleader. What do we do as a motivator and cheerleader working as an emergency department recovery coach? So how do you motivate somebody that you're meeting for the very first time who may not be completely understanding of what is even going on? How do you connect to that person and really get them to think about what their next step could be, and could it be a pathway of recovery? How do we do that? And so the other piece might be, how do we inform and encourage and support family members that might also be there? And how do we encourage them, to kind of, give whatever this pathway looks like a chance? How do we kind of coordinate that whole process? And that's really, if we jump ahead at looking at the art of recovery coaching, that's what we're all building here, is we're building our art of how we practice recovery coaching. And so the next piece of the recovery coach role that we look at is resource brokers. And so how, what are the biggest barriers to recovery for those who are coming into an emergency department? How might you as a recovery coach overcome those barriers? And how do you decide which resources to refer people to? This is one of those pieces where it's really important for us to understand the places that we're giving people as referrals, if they're going into detox, or if that's their wish and that's what they want. what are the places that we're looking at? How are we researching them? How do we know what's best for that person? Again, too, we want to make sure that if we're giving somebody, if somebody wants something and maybe they don't get it right away because there aren't any beds available, how are we going to make sure that that person, goes from the emergency department to maybe home back into detox if that bed isn't available for a couple of days? What do we do with that process? How do we help in that process? And so those are all those pieces that we as emergency department recovery coaches really need to think about. It's not as much as here's a pamphlet, here's all a bunch of numbers, I'll see you later. We're there to really, that's what they get when they go into emergency department normally. We're there to help connect them with recovery. So how do we do that? And some of those pieces, we may not even be aware that there's difficulty getting people into beds. We may not even be aware that there might be difficulty, working with staff to sign off on certain things. But those are things that we know that people have experienced. And so how do we deal with those things? Again, using that motivator, cheerleader hat, using that advocacy hat. And so to close this piece out, we have two different role plays. One is that a recovery that you're meeting with is thinking about going into a treatment program, and you need to get clearance from a social worker. The social worker has seen this recovery several times and isn't convinced he'll see this through. How do you persuade that social worker to sign off on this? What is it that you can do? How can you advocate? How can you motivate? What are those bags of tricks that you have to pull from to make this happen for this person? The second one is a recovery is concerned about what to tell their family who's been waiting outside. What can you say to help the recovery with that process? How can you get that recovery to advocate for themselves? Maybe you have to role play with that recovery to think about, what they might say to their family, and also motivate them. You can do this. You can have this conversation. You can advocate for yourself. If you know that this is what you want to do, this is, what is the best outcome for you. Let's have this conversation. Do you need me there with you, while you have the conversation? Those are all the pieces we want people to think about. Any questions about that last module, really diving in deeper as to how we perform and help others in the emergency department? I see John's typing, so I'll just give that. This is done in small groups. So you would show the slide for advocate, and then they go into their small groups and answer those questions, and then you might have them report out, and then you give them the slide for motivator and cheerleader, and have them go into small groups to answer some of those questions and then report out. So, but this is one of those things, John, where it could also be, let's say your group is really small, or you don't have enough time to kind of do that back and forth. So maybe you do it in the whole class. So it really just depends. That role play, I would do like, yeah, so I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were talking about the role play. So with the role play, you can really just have one person play the recovery coach and one person play the social worker. And in the second one, you can have one person play the recovery and one person play the recovery coach. So just have people pair up. And you can have them stand up, find somebody, to partner with and give the first role play, and then maybe have them switch it up and do another role play. So it's really up to you about how you want to do that. I hope that makes sense. Perfect. So the next module really talks about developing your art as recovery coaches. This is something that we've been focusing a lot on because we know that there's a science. the skills that, we need to know in order to perform our job, but how we perform our job is really about the art, our individual art. When do we pull a tool out of our toolbox? What do we say? That's, when we look back at those questions and sample statements that were generated in motivational interviewing, that's our art. Yes, motivational interviewing is the science. Those are the skills that we need to understand how to do it. But what we say, how we say it, who we say it to, that's our art. And developing our art is just remaining open and curious, to all the different possibilities. And especially coming to a training like this really gives people that understanding to, like, wow, there is so much that is more about how I connect than really what I bring with me. It's one thing to have, like I said, that kind of toolbox of brochures. Great, you're equipped, but when do you pull out what when is really looking at the art of it. And so to do this piece and to reinforce this, we have included a blog by Phil Valentine that was written in February, and it's really based on the art of recovery coaching. And so it's in the manuals, people can read it, and so we want people to think about what are the thoughts once they've read this blog? What are the things that they think about? And then individually, we want them to look at writing down what are the gifts that they have, what do they bring to the role, and how would they define their art? So if they think about being a recovery coach, what are the gifts, what do they bring, and how would you define it? To really think about. And if you see in this slide, again, the science would be those recovery fundamentals: actively listening, asking good questions, again, motivational interviewing, managing and discovering your own stuff. But how you treat people as resources, how you offer encouragement and emanate hope, enhancing your curiosity, that's about the art. And especially with this, and especially going into emergency departments, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so sometimes it's just that opening statement that you have with somebody that will get you to be able to have that bigger conversation and to plant that seed of recovery. If you don't even get past that opening line, if then it doesn't even matter what you have in that bag of tricks and all the brochures and all the, things that you have for the multiple pathways, because you're not going to get any further than there. And so we really want people to think about that. And to further kind of go through and kind of solidify this even more so, we want participants to think about writing a SMART goal centered around developing their art of recovering coaching. And so we have a page that, on next steps: how will I practice my art? How will this practice help me to do my job effectively? And then writing a small goal to hold ourselves accountable. And then we give folks an opportunity to share that with their partner. And this could be one of those things where you give them a few minutes to share it with their partner, or if you want to use this as part of the closing activity to share what their goal is, just go around the room. That's more than fine too. But from there, you really want to encourage people that this is definitely something where, specifically working in such a specialized area as an emergency department, it's going to take different skills than, what we've trained people for in just the RCA. And so we really want people to think about, when they are working with all these different people, remembering their accountability and everything else, that all goes back to how they're utilizing their skills, which is really an art. This is time where we kind of leave off on a couple of closing quotes from some of our emergency department recovery coaches, and then really share any final thoughts. Before we move on into the evaluation piece, are there any questions about that last section on developing the art of recovery coaching? Okay, so with this piece and with this section, it is really important that trainers give this information to participants in their entirety. We really appreciate when trainers make sure that folks understand where the instructions are in their participant manual, that they write the class number down for them. And so we have a slide that you can type into. So when you get this information from Lizanne, you can put it right into this slide so that you have it and you can post it before people leave. And even though the instructions are on a specific page in the manual, please go through them. We get a ton of questions about people not understanding the evaluation process or people just putting in EDRC and not realizing that they did have a class number. So please take the time. It only takes a few minutes to go through this. And what happens is it's the end of a 2-day training. People are ready to get out of there, and I completely get it. But if you give them that opportunity to actually read through these instructions, then they might have, that opportunity to write this thing down and know where to go to look for it when they get home and they're in front of a computer. So what we want people to know about taking the evaluation is that they have to go into a web browser and type this full address. And so obviously those X's would be replaced by a 4-digit class number, but it would, so it was surveymonkey.com/r/EDRC, let's just say 1234, right? And then our class number would be those same 4 numbers, 1234. All that information is emailed to you from Lizanne when you register your training. And so people don't need to put in the number sign. The class number is just 4 single digits, 1, 2, 3, 4. Once they've completed the evaluation, they have to wait 2 hours. But if they go to recoverycoachacademy.us after that time, they type in their email address and their certificate will populate. It's a very easy process, but I do know that some people sometimes get confused. They might go to surveymonkey.com without typing in that full address in their web browser, and then all of a sudden they're taking a survey for electricity use and not realizing that has nothing to do with this particular program. Again, just take a few minutes to kind of go through this piece so people understand it. If people do have questions after the training and you get those things, you get emails from folks, you can definitely, if you're not sure why something's happening, forward them to us. We will take care of it. But having these last couple of minutes of the day where you go through these instructions thoroughly really helps cut down on the amount of phone calls that we get from people who don't understand the process. Any questions about that evaluation piece? So the other piece that I just want to share with you is that we have in the back of the book, I told you already, we have the CCAR Emergency Department job description. We also have a script for your first meeting with a recovery that some of our Emergency Department Recovery Coach staff came up with. We also have a glossary of terms, and this was something that was developed by the Surgeon General's report on alcohol, drugs, and health. And this is just a really good idea for somebody who's unfamiliar with working in a medical setting to just have an understanding of what these terms are, or if they hear something, they can go back to this section and probably see a definition for it. The other piece that we also have is a list of abbreviations that are typically used. And then there is an Emergency Department Recovery Coach Program overview that we have in the back of the book that just gives an overview of our program in case people are interested. And so what questions, if you think about the different modules, is there any area that you feel unsure about delivering? Or are there any areas that you feel concerned about that you want to address when training this curriculum? Thanks, Angel. So is there any way that we can better support you as trainers? Going once, going twice? All right. If there are no other questions about the curriculum, I'll conclude the webinar. Be advised that I will be sending you this recording so you can go back and watch it if you'd like at your leisure. Also, I'll send you the slides because there are some points that we make in the red, just to kind of, give you an idea of what's supposed to happen when. And if there's anything else when you get that email from me, let me know. I'll also resend out the Emergency Department Recovery Coach Trainers Agreement that we went over at the beginning of the webinar, because I will need to have that signed and sent back into me. You can either email it to Stacy, STACY, at ccard.us, or you can fax it. That is 860-244-2228. Just get that back to me. Once I receive it, I will forward on your certificate of completion that would authorize you as a trainer of this curriculum. So without any further ado, if no one needs anything else, I will let you all go. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.